How are we doing?
Hold on.
We're live now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mhm.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EduTALK. EduTALk is a bi-monthly virtual talk show created out of the need for a global learning community focused on topics in education that directly impact Caribbean nations and diaspora nationals working across the globe. EduTalk features teachers, principals, administrators, business leaders, and dignitaries who share their expertise on critical topics facing education today with the common goal of moving education forward and our students upward. My name is Dr. Dwayne Dice, your host and founder of Education Solutions International. I am joined by my distinguished colleague and co-host, Dr. Miguel Barker, a seasoned administrator and principal in Oman International School, located in the Middle East. He also served as the Chief Education Officer at Education Solutions International, Inc. Please visit Education Solutions International and learn more about our initiatives, our programs, as well as become a part of the movement, Education Solutions International, ESI. I'm joined also by our special guest, Professor Rosalea Hamilton, and she is the founding director of law. Go ahead, Dr.
It's Rosalie.
Rosalie, oh God. Rosalie, I'm butchering your name as we speak here. Yes.
Dwayne, before we get started, it just
Yes.
seems like we're getting a weird reverb that I'm not sure what's causing that reverb, but seems to be happening. And yes, I'm sure this will be a very, very interesting and informative conversation. We look forward to the contributions that Professor Rosalie will provide today to continue that conversation. She certainly seems to be interested in and will bring a certain perspective that will broaden how we consider this issue, because what we are seeing is a very narrow conversation, and sometimes it might be divisive, and sometimes political, and sometimes uninformed. But we do believe that moving forward, cutting, let's say, the umbilical cords from our past may allow us to walk free. So welcome, Professor Hamilton, to the conversation. Welcome joining us on EduTalk, and we look forward to hear and learn together today.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Professor Hamilton, tell us a little bit about your work, because you're founding director of Institute of Law and economics. And I know you have done a lot more work than that. So tell us a little bit about the work that you're involved in the Caribbean.
Well, let me talk a little about the work I've been doing in the education sphere. I was vice president, University of Technology, Jamaica. And actually before that, I was adjunct lecturer at the Northern Caribbean University. Okay. And, so I enjoy teaching, but my role at the University of Technology, Jamaica was more in administration. And I had a portfolio responsibility for development. And so it gave me a chance to see and to look at the education system broadly through the administrative lens, as well as the perspective of education from the classroom. So, the whole education landscape, I think we talk about it to death. There's so much that needs to be done, but importantly, it plays such a vital role in our economy and our society that we really have to pay attention to. So I certainly want to congratulate both of you for this initiative. We can't talk enough and do enough about education. And so it's a great initiative.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Dr. Barker and myself, we're toiling week after week to get ideas out there and to even pull out ideas out of people as well, because we don't want them to expire, the ideas to expire before they actually become materialized.
Yeah.
So so let's get show on the road. We want to highlight a few things about Jamaica's journey from independence, even before that, leading up to independence, and also after independence, and that journey that marked or some people might say it scarred us, and give us some perspective on what we should reflect on, as well as the burden that we carry as Jamaicans and a colony, as it were, in the past. And that burden becomes a part of our education system. So we want to highlight a few things that, as Dr. Barker said earlier on, we're grappling with. It might be controversial a little bit, but we're not controversial. We are trying to pave a path for our children and young people, so that they will have it better in understanding history and rewrite some of that accurately as we move forward. So
I'm not sure how you achieve that without the controversy, but I hear you. Because change by definition is controversial.
Yes,
so,
yes. Yes, so your work, the article that you wrote, and I'm gonna drop it in the chat in YouTube in a little bit. It's highlighting Jamaica as a journey towards republic, being a republic. Mm-hmm. What gave you this idea to put it in writing for the populace?
Well, we have been talking about this journey for a long time. A Constitutional Commission was set up in 1995. There was discussions way before that from independence. And it's kind of mushroomed to where we are today, where certainly Barbados became independent. And so it renewed this conversation we've been having for a long time in Jamaica. And importantly, the Prime Minister recently told, the grandchildren of our head of state, the children, I should say, of the head of state, that we're going to move on. And I think that and our own advocacy around the need for change and to move away from the being a head of state and to become a republic have, I think, increased the conversation in the society. And the clarity of what it means is important, because there's really a lot of confusion about what exactly a republic means. And I thought that laying out, I think, at least two broad perspectives were important, because we've seen republics in the Caribbean simply move the head of the Queen of Head of State and effectively create a republic without, in my mind, tackling the core issues involved in a republic. The idea of a government by the people, of the people, for the people. I think it's an important concept because, and I noted in the article that we downplay that aspect of it because there's a view that our current approaches to democracy, let me put it that way, because some people will argue that we're not democratic.
Yeah.
I would say that's perhaps an overstatement of the reality. We have an embryonic democracy. We're at this early phase of what it takes. And I think the experience of America speaks volumes of an old democracy that is still struggling with what it really means and how one has to stay vigilant of the ideals of this system we call a democracy. And so there's a blurring of the idea of what we currently have, which we call a democracy, which perhaps is not quite what we want yet, and the idea of a republic. And so in trying to clarify these issues, it is my hope that what it does is begin and further the conversation that has long started, but perhaps in this new phase, we begin this consolidation of ideas and discussion that will push us in a direction that we can all agree.
All right, so I'll pick up on a point you made because, as I said, we're here to learn. And the point you made is that there's a lot of confusion about, first of all, you lay out the groundwork to say that there are Caribbean nations that have already made that step. But from your observation and perhaps clear evidence as well, it doesn't seem to have changed the direction that those countries have decided to take in terms of what you consider to be the core, right? And so to bring that to the Jamaican context, what I'd like a little bit of help with is understanding if, for example, Jamaica becomes a republic, and when it does, how would governance be different? What would it look like in a different way? For example, if we think about our current two-party structure, the relay baton being passed from one to the other, you mentioned the political decisions being driven by political party will rather than the people will. So as an enlightening piece for me, certainly, I'm not a constitutional person in that sense, in that, you're a lawyer in that sense and a professor of law in that sense. What I'd like you to do is help me a little bit and us to understand how would that be different in Jamaica?
For me, the most important difference is the conception and actions of the people in a democracy and in a republic.
Okay.
Because the idea of a democracy and a republic is that the people put a government in place to represent their interests and their will. Mm-hmm. The contrast is important because, many of us know the system we have, but we don't know what it is like to live under dictatorship or on a monarchy or, absolute monarchy right? So that's the contrast, and that's how it emerged in history, where people, certainly in Europe and other places where monarchies existed, the idea that it suffocated the will of people. There are millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people in countries that want to achieve, let's just agree on a good standard of living. And so the question is, what's the best system of government that best represents that? And so when you when you strive for democracy, you're really talking about a system in which the people, through their representatives or directly, can shape and influence decisions that directly affect their lives. and affect their capacity to achieve these objectives, like a better standard of living. So if you think about what we now have, what we have is a system where we focus a lot on elections as defined in our democracy. But our 60 years of experience of elections have told us that we're at a stage now where we see a lot of vote buying in our elections.
Yes,
We
yes.
see declining participation. So we have to ask ourselves, are we really electing governments to reflect our will? Those are fundamental questions to ask when you have very low voter turnout and a lot of what people might describe as apathy. So if people feel that whoever they put in power is not representing their will, and somehow they can't affect the changes, these decisions are made, but there's no systematic, organized institutional arrangements to have their voices heard. And we can talk about what that means, right? Then people feel disillusioned and they're turned off. So the idea then is that as we seek to deepen democracy, as we put in place a republic where we really want, and we're clear that the goal and the objective is to improve what we have, deepen that democracy so that the voices of the people can be heard and that the people's interest is front and center. We can again contrast that to what is now perceived and real in some cases of a selected few, a handful of people whose interest seems always to be protected and encouraged and served, while the majority seem to be on the edge. And if we look at the systems that we've set up on education, let's talk about education. So we've inherited a system that served the interests of a few. That's the colonial legacy. And we know the structure of our education system. We have a few elite schools that you can get the best education from, and the majority are in schools that are not as well resourced, and we see a lot of failure rates very high. People are not even sitting these exams and so on. Now, we're talking 60 years. Why have we not fixed that? Is it that we perpetuate these institutions because they continue to serve the interests of a few? We have to ask those questions. And in my mind, if we are setting up a government that's in the interest of the people and for the people, then certainly a direct implication for education is that we need an egalitarian education system. An education system in which there are no better schools that one set of people go to, and less inferior schools that others go to. So we have to change that. And so we can look at different institutional arrangements and ask ourselves that question. Are the people, the majority of the people, at the center of this decision-making process? And therefore, what ought we to change in order to do that? And so I want to make this last point just to reinforce the key. You don't get to these systems by the majority of us being passive, and we go to elections, we simply vote our representatives, and we sit back, fold our hands, and wait until they fix the society up for us. That's what we've been doing for 60 years. That has to change. And so the change and the aspirations and goals of a republic is directly linked to the extent to which the people of Jamaica say, we agree, we own Jamaica, Jamaica belongs to us, and we are hiring people to represent our interests. And we want the power to fire them if they're not doing their jobs, and that's the impeachment arrangement or recall. We want to have a direct say in how our taxpayers' dollars are spent. That's the participatory budgeting arrangement. And we want to be involved as a matter of course not as an afterthought or whenever or representatives feel like. We want opportunities to have a say, to have hearings, to hear our voice, so that we too can contribute to the decisions that affect us. And they're not simply macro decisions that are made through technical lenses that looks at the society as a whole, but forgets the people in Trenchtown or in Westmoreland or in St. Elizabeth that has particular issues that somehow, when you make these macro decisions, their views have been left out. So that's the kind of society we want to build.
Let me follow the point you're making then, only because so I have had the experience of living in Jamaica. I left there at age 28. I've spent 10 years living in the UK, which is a different kind of participatory democracy, a different kind of parliamentary democracy, separate to ours in some ways because of the devolution and stuff that happens in different parts of the country, the whole United Kingdom. And I've lived in Oman for 10 years, which is a monarchy, full absolute rule, leadership by decree, Supreme Council decision tomorrow, and so on. So I think I have a lot of lived experiences of seeing how governments work. And having lived in the UK and see how some of what you just described seems to happen, the participatory democracy. I leave the impeachment and the recall power separately, because that seems to be more US focused in my understanding. The UK's view of politics is that if the people do not like the party scan first, do a no confidence vote, like what happened with Boris yesterday. And that is a way of removing someone from a party. And then secondly, you can have an election and be removed overnight. You can call an election a month after being elected if you wanted to, if you feel you needed to make a point. So the participatory piece, I know for a fact that the UK offers a lot of discussion. So my question is, and it still comes back to almost the same one I ask, is, and I'm certainly of the view that we should cut from the idea of the Queen assent, right, and the Governor General. But I'm also not naive enough to believe that that represents a change, because you can effectively convert your Governor General to the President, and you can retain everything else. And continue. So in terms of a republic, if it is only name only, it is only a stroke of a pen. What I'm considering here is when we become a republic, what exactly are we changing in terms of the governing systems, given that what you've described, any government could come in, even under the current system, and broaden participation if they wanted to, and they put the laws in place to make that happen. Any government could come in and say that, we are going to devolve more of the responsibilities through local government as against central government, which is really where our bigger issues are. They can, because they do have the power. So I'm just trying to understand what that republic brings in its name that would force that to happen. And we can maybe narrow it to education if we want to, because I know that we want to keep it to education, but I also want to understand your broader framework.
Well, I think the broad framework, again, is about the extent to which all of us, your voice, my voice, all of us can contend about what system we want. We all have ideas, and I could talk about my ideas, but that's not the core message. The core message is not about how I think, what I think about what that republic should be. Because if that's the case, then it's about me telling you about the system I think that's best for you, right? So it's important that we, I repeat that point, that the systems that we're looking for, we need to agree on. We need to devise them. We have models all over the world and we can look at them. But what we know is that the systems we have in place don't seem to be working. There's absolutely no trust and confidence in the system for the vast majority of Jamaican people. Right now, they see no difference in the two major political parties. there is a lot of, when you talk to Jamaicans, there's just a lot of frustration. I saw the thing set, not now got change, I just saw it's there. Or you kill up yourself for. Those are the kinds of feedback you get. Now, for me, we're at first base because I can spend the whole night talking about presidential versus, prime ministerial systems, or we can restructure the Senate, our, elected Senate versus a nominated. We can do all of that. But it's a kind of academic debate if Jamaicans don't make up their mind that, listen, we need to get involved. So we are, in fact, as part of the work I'm doing in the Advocates Network, we're going to engage a set of public awareness interactions. And we really want to spend a lot of time focusing. We're going to talk about the Constitution, but we're going to spend a lot of time talking about why it's important for Jamaicans to start with this idea that you can't build a democracy or a republic. You can't get what you want out of government unless you are prepared to act. Mm-hmm. If we can't move from there, I fear that even when we move the Queen as head of state, and we even may make some constitutional changes here and there, nothing significant will change. The major change in my mind will take place when enough Jamaicans decide, yes, this is my society, this is my country, I am going to take responsibility. I'm going to turn up at the meetings when you, for example, your MP wants to talk to you. There's some MPs, let me say quickly, who want to hear from their constituents, but they call the meetings, they don't turn up. Oh, man. So we have to change all of that. And we need to put arrangements in place where when they turn up to the meetings, this is a rub, when they turn up to the meetings and they make decisions with their representatives and say, this is what I want you to say in Parliament, that the MPs do go to Parliament and they vote what their constituents want and not simply follow a party line. That's when we'll get a change. But as long as we have a system now, we know the system well, power is concentrated in the hands of the Prime Minister and the cabinet. The Prime Minister and all members of Parliament want ultimately to be in the cabinet, because that's where the power lies. And so they simply follow the party line. That's where political power lies. And as long as you reproduce the system, it shuts out all other voices. Yeah. Now, if you're powerful in Jamaica, as some people are, and you can influence the cabinet and the Prime Minister, you have the ear of the Prime Minister, you can get a lot done. And so, for some people, nothing is wrong with the system, because they can influence it. And they're benefiting. The average person who cannot, you have a system in which, unless you play ball with the politicians, unless you do exactly what they want, you goose cook, as we say in Jamaica.
Professor Awana, how far along is it? Is it are there any writings on the books that they're debating? Or you said we're at the first base.
We're at the first base, and what happened in Parliament today just tells us that we might be at that first base for a long time. So the minister with responsibility for legal and constitutional affairs came to Parliament, and she talked about the history of our Constitution, and she talked about the fact that the government is committed to constitutional change. We're happy to hear that. Right. And it is important to do something in a very comprehensive way. We're told that a constitutional commission will set up again with no timelines, with no terms of reference. So some of us are saying, are we going to see another commission that produces a report that sits for decades before any change takes place? There's no reassurance to the society that this will be different this time. And no timelines as to when we will begin this important dialogue with the public. In fact, I listened closely to the speech and the presentation, and I didn't hear enough of the idea of a republic that is going to represent the will of the people. And so I wonder if we will again get changes that will simply replicate what we've seen in the rest of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Now, it is important that, and the government has made it clear that they intend to do these constitutional changes. These are very contentious issues because we all have views and we have to find ways to settle them. It will take time, we all agree on that. And therefore, it is our view that we definitely could move to unify the nation, have this very unique experience where all of us together as Jamaicans can say, yes, it's time to move the Queen of Head of State. Let's just agree on that one constitutional change.
I think,
to start.
and I mean, at 60-year-old, you still have to ask your mother how to do this. It's certainly not a state that you want to be in.
Absolutely.
So I think in its simplest form, that last point you made is really one that is not debatable, because it's not debatable, but it's one that what I'm worried about is that this become a political conversation and not a national conscious.
So are we.
And I think even expecting the government to lead this has a lot of problems, because there are political party considerations that want to be the party that does it. Yeah. And so even the consultative process, you may find conversations that make it seem far more complicated than it needs to be. And so it might need a stroke of a pen, a decision that a group of people may, or even the government in power make. But I don't see it. I see. So yeah, that's my first view on it, is that yes, it's not difficult to get to the point where we all agree that Jamaica should, at age 60, stop asking their mother if they should allocate this amount of money.
Miguel,
I think it's the simplest way to look at it. You cannot have true independence if you keep having to take up the phone and ask your mother, so should I spend money here today? Should I go out tonight? Should I? Yep. So in its simplest form, and maybe part of the communication of this, it still resides in academia, the conversation. I mean, the average man on the road does not have this conversation. I know this because I speak to a lot of average people on the road. So in academia, we're still using terms like the Constitution, and we're talking about republic and democracy and so on. But again, if it's going to be a change that's for the people, the conversation needs to move away from the academic and to the educative, to more about making people understand the basic thing we're asking them to understand. But moving out of your mother house and taking on that responsibility, where does this power lie? Now with you, right? So now that you get your pay and you're not asking how to spend it, how will you spend it? Yeah. How will you still use counsel in order to make good decisions? So we can agree 100% that the idea of removing the Queen, I don't think it's a debatable conversation in Jamaica. It's only debatable because it's political. I think so. I think that's the only reason why it's debatable. But let's take it into the educational sphere a little bit, because we're EduTALK and we like to have a conversation around the educational sphere. And I'm not even talking about educating people about the Constitution per se, but you made the point about the egalitarianness that is required for education to rise to the level. And as I said, I live in the UK, and if you ask any politician on the other side that is not in power, they'd say education is failing, not meeting the needs, still have elite schools, the Etons, the Arrows, and it exists in the UK, the same kind of two-tiered system, and Boris Johnson can be prime minister, but easily not as competent as many people or any of us sitting in this place in terms of, even just having integrity. Mm-hmm. So my question is around that really, if we, and I know I get your points as well. I get your point that with people in charge and we don't know what may happen, they'll get what they want. I get that point, right? But I also hope that you're able to give us a picture of how decision-making would change, not necessarily what the decisions would be, but how decision-making would change in a Republic Jamaica, I think I'd like, in terms of education.
So before I come to that, how we make decisions, let's come back to your analogy though, because it's important to clarify that, the mother in the house analogy that you use. We're not at this point since 1962 asking mother to make any decision. Remember, in 62, mommy said she only wanted the ceremonial, right? That was the power we all agreed we're giving her, right? So she turns up pretty. Well, she first delegates power to somebody else, and they turn up on these occasions, and they only do, whoever she delegated the governor general, they only do what the prime minister tells them to do. So it's important that we clarify that we're not dependent on the British for any of these decisions since 1962, okay? So the question here is, all right, so since 62, we've had this opportunity to make these decisions in a self-reliant way in our interests. All right, let's look at how we're making decisions now. So and I'd like us to talk through the budget because it's an important set of decisions. So every year, the budget process starts with the calls to the ministry, and the ministries with their technical teams put some ministerial budgets together. Those are brought together, discussed at cabinet, and the Minister of Finance ultimately, and of course I'm shortening the process, put something together and makes the decision. There's nowhere in that process in which you or I can say, here's how we think our money should be spent. Now, the idea of participatory budgeting is not a new novel idea. I'm not coming up with it. Many governments across the world have, in fact, IMF, and we've been on the IMF agreements, have been encouraging participatory budgeting for a long time. And it's not enough just to say at the end, hey, this is what this is how we divvy up the money and make it easy and accessible to people, which is what the minister did. There have been initiatives even before him. I was involved through the Institute of Law and Economics. We've simplified the budget. We've created a people's budget. All of that is done. What is not done is creating opportunities for Jamaicans to say, I want a say. And there are many ways to do it. One way is to say, for example, we have a massive crime problem. And you see these 20 communities in Jamaica, we notice that these are the communities that is generating these huge crime murders every year. We're seeing it consistently. So guess what? We're going to give you a slice of the budget. Since we have tried for decades and we're not really able to get this crime problem down, we're going to say to people, help us to decide how we're going to spend this money so as to deal with this problem of crime. The people in these communities know, they know the criminals, they know what's driving the criminal behavior, but we've never trusted them enough to say, listen, here is some money. We're going to sit with you, bring the technical experts around the table, we need them to. We will listen to you carefully, and we're going to go with your solutions about how to solve this problem. That's one thing that we can do, right? We have a range of problems across Jamaica, and we can pick them up. That's just social problems. Let's talk about economic problems. Now, one of the complaints I've heard in Jamaica for decades is the extent to which we do not exploit, and we're not doing enough to develop and invest in the huge potential we have in the music and entertainment industries. True. We've heard that for decades, and it boggles the mind. Why? Why are we not? Right now, the Prime Minister came to us recently and said, I have this massive investment coming in, and guess what? I don't have enough trained people. So guess what? I'm going to have to go import them. Why is the Prime Minister not finding investment to match the infinite amount of talent that we have in, say, the music and cultural industry? Why is that investment not helping to develop this talent that we know we have? It's abundant. We're not short of talent there.
An industry,
right? Sorry?
They don't run it like an industry. They treat it as a hustle.
That's exactly why we need the investment. That's why we need investment. We need investment to streamline it, to put the infrastructure in place, to make sure that it can run as a proper industry that can yield the kinds of benefits that we know it can yield.
It's still largely a cashed industry. I'm going to DJ tonight, pay me my money.
Yeah, but without getting into the details of the industry, I just want to use that example with respect to the idea of the budget. Why don't we say to the pioneers, the people we know do very well in the industry, understand it inside out. In fact, we have pioneers in the industry that created it out of nothing, still around today. Let's bring them together and say, here is a couple $100 million, because we know, we believe in this industry, and we know that it has a transformative effect.
Yeah,
so to spend it. Why are we not doing that? I believe that when we begin to do that, we can see real change in Jamaica.
Professor Hamilton, pertaining to your points that you're giving here on the budget and the Constitution, information about the Constitution and education about the Constitution and the constitutional change that might occur or probably will occur. What do you think are some of the ways in which we can reach the common people so that they start talking about these issues? And you mentioned the advocacy network. So what are some of the ways that we can reach the common people?
Well, let me just talk about the industry we're just talking about, through music and the arts.
Yeah.
That's one way. We have begun to engage our musicians and people in the creative industry. And we say, if you believe, like us, that this is the way to go for Jamaica, help us. Help this to become part of the day-to-day narrative and conversation of the Jamaican people. Help them to see that it is in their interest, it's in all our interests for us to be active, to get actively engaged, to create a future that we want. And that's one group, but we have to speak to all elements of society. There are academics who are also on the fence, not convinced that we need to change anything. We need to engage them as well. They're technical people, they're young kids, children. So all of us have to find a way to engage. And I think you have created a platform through this mechanism and other mechanisms where you too, the diaspora wants to know and understand. Yeah. And there are different channels of communication, ways to communicate. And it's all of that coming together that will make a difference. There's no one way and there's no one conversation. Because if you go to the simplest form of communication, there are people in the society like yourselves that will ask, explain, what do you mean by this?
Yeah.
Right? So you have to ramp up the conversation to the audience that you're talking to.
So currently, if the average person in a part of Jamaica has an issue and wants to inform the government, they go and talk with their MP, right? And then the MP may carry it forward if it suits the party line. This is the current structure, and it's a direct route. You talk to your MP, you wait outside his office or her office, and if you see her, you tell her the problem. Most times, I think I get what you're saying, and I'm really, really trying to get my head around how we shift the mindset here, because the average person, it's my experience, who stands outside the MP office is there to advocate on their personal behalf. Either the road, they might go as far as the road that they are living on needs to be fixed, which maybe serve that community good. But in general, the perception of politics is, what can I get out of it for myself as a person, right? I'm going to ask for school fees to my kids, or books to my kids, or help with bus fare, or a job, or get on the farm work program. But effectively, our participatory democracy, or at least the involvement of the people at that kind of granular level, is really, can I get a chance to talk to the MP? And then the MP can act in his own benevolence as king, technically, and make decrees like fix this road, or here's some money, or here's a pot of money to spend, but effectively it doesn't go to the legislature, or, you know, in whether as an opposition MP, or, you know, it doesn't get to a conversation if it doesn't suit the party view. So again, I'm kind of like I know the America system is a lot of committees and mayoral and all these stuff.
Yeah,
so
checks and balances.
In the future, the idealized kind of future of Jamaica as a republic, the role of, for example, the parish councils becoming far more integral, and the role of the MP becoming less so.
Yeah, I don't know if it's less and more. It's really how, through both mechanisms, one aimed at the national level and one at local level, people's voices are incorporated. It's important to know that right now there's legislation on the books that provide mechanisms for Jamaicans to be involved at the mayoral levels with respect to the municipalities. So people can now directly elect their mayors in some cases, and very importantly, there are also impeachment provisions in which you can, in fact, make arrangements to move the mayor if the mayor doesn't do what needs to be done. Now, similarly, with respect to having citizens' voice in terms of the budgets in local governments, that's also there. First of all, most Jamaicans don't know of those arrangements.
True.
So again, that's why I come back to step one. Let's start with the base point. If you don't have the view that your voice matters, that this country belongs to you and you ought to have a say, then you're not even going to search to see how can I get my voice heard. Because it's an active process. Because as you act, you learn. You know, we don't come all with perfect knowledge. I can tell you, with all of the studies I've done, I don't have full perfect knowledge or comprehensive knowledge of all that needs to be done. And the systems, I'm learning as I go. As I see these issues, I delve into it. I said, oh, I didn't know this. We're all learning. That's important to note. Very important to note, right? So at the local government levels, there are mechanisms. Now it needs to be strengthened. But the extent to which those decisions at the local government level are still controlled by a ministry, the responsibility for local government. Everything now is at the national level with respect to the budgetary allocations, etc., etc., etc.
That's crazy.
You talk about going to your MP. Remember, Jamaicans understand, if my MP not only is not on the ruling side, but it's also not in cabinet.
Yes.
Because that means
nothing getting done.
Nothing, right? That's the deal, right? So we all want our MPs to be powerful in cabinet because we know that they can make decisions and they can influence where resources flow. So if you are in a constituency where your party is not the winning party, then you hope that something flows to you. You can't run a country like this. We cannot continue to run a country like this.
Miguel, it seemed like, what you're talking about, which is empowering, and Professor Hamilton really hit the nail on the head, where at the local level, becoming a republic, you literally centralize power right there for local people. So you actually give them more power at the local level so they can run their schools and run their police stations and so on, and take care of even crime and violence at the local level will be more centralized, and they can take care of them and put initiative in these communities to fix the problems. But everything is so centralized at the national level that it's when you get to these local problems, you get to them, if you ever get to them.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I think, if we think about the decentralized issues
Yeah.
in the localities, they're not just individual issues. Let's be very clear. Yes, people are preoccupied with their personal issues. But when it comes to roads, we see that the community come together. When it comes to water, right? And so on. So when it comes to these shared public services, we can and do come together. And so the extent to which, and let me pick up the issue of the roads, because that's a major problem now.
Yes,
And
yes.
we are tired of seeing millions of dollars spent on fixing roads, and within 6 months, I'm not even saying a year now, within 6 months, the road gone bad again.
Yep.
And there's a kind of view that it's deliberately done that way so that people can eat a food, you can give somebody. So let's be clear that if we want good roads that are that can stand up and are sustainable, then let's think again about how we're making the decisions about who and how the road is built. And one of the things that accountability, monitoring, and so on is key. Because if you get the community actively involved in monitoring how from the money spent into the actual and the maintenance and so on, then a lot of information is now at the fingertips of decision makers to make better decisions. Because we know if the amount of money that is spent for the asphalt really go on the road or on somebody's private driveway. And we will definitely know the extent to which the overruns that are claimed are in fact legitimate overruns. So the eyes of the public, whose interest is definitely into making sure that we have a better road, you like it to get better outcomes. Now, let me say this. I am not naive enough, and I don't think any of us who are advocating for these ideas are of the view that every single decision that the people make will be the best or the perfect. I shouldn't say the best. Would be the ideal decision or the perfect decision. I backtrack on best because I think it's the best way we know how to make decisions. It's better than decisions by a few, because we know that when a few people make decisions and a few people are privileged with information, then the probability of abuse and the probability of perpetuating inequalities and inequities are much higher.
Yes.
And therefore, I think we strive towards these decision-making processes in which more voices are involved, because we think it's overall a better way to make decisions. It's not flawless, and it's not going to be devoid of challenges.
I think I think there are some key points here. One, certainly we need to, let's center it back on the idea that certainly Jamaica needs to move away from the idea that the Queen has to give some form of assent. I know your point is that we don't really ask for permission, but we still require some form of assent that says the Queen approves it, but not necessarily disagrees, even if she disagrees. The other piece we're talking about here is the way that manifests itself in reality, in terms of how we make it inclusive enough that people on the ground understands how they themselves can affect power. The point I was bringing in is the idea that we currently have a really designed system to work in the way that it is working. I mean, even when the government acknowledged, I think it was Bruce Golden, acknowledged that constituencies were too dependent, were benefiting if they were in power and if they were in the cabinet, and he brought in the Constituency Development Fund as a way of equalizing that and ensuring that constituencies weren't suffering due to being in a power and out of power. It still was centralized through the Member of Parliament. And so effectively nothing changed in the way governance was happening. This is my observation. And so even with that acknowledgement, the way that the change was enacted was still in a way that would perpetuate that same group of people holding power, and in no way shifted any of the power to people. So my concern will be around there, that as we look at it, that we realize that because we're asking the people who are currently in power or in politics, not necessarily in power, but in politics, to consider this change, they will put systems in place that will perpetuate even in another name. So that's one thing we need to look at. It's clear that the intention of central government is never to allow the parishes to function as a unit. It's clear, or the counties to function as a unit. It is clear because there's not been any legislation or any movement to say that we'll recognize a parish as a unit. As your point was, Dice, about the idea of running their police forces, running their schools. There's no movement. I've not heard any conversations in that direction to say St. Mary has certain conditions, certain road conditions, certain school setup, certain distances, certain mountains, certain rivers, certain resources. I don't see enough happening on that. And I believe if we're looking at that kind of devolution of power and incorporating people's voices, we really have to look at saying, how are we going to start from the ground up? And it has to come by saying, you are in charge of yourself. Here's how the budget works. We'll take care of the army. We'll take care of the trade missions. We'll take care of these things. But you take care of the local things, because the crime in this little community here is, we're going to say, is your responsibility, but we'll give you a big police budget and we'll blah, blah, blah. So my thing is, and as the conversation develops, and you are more in this than me, but this is just me coming in from a personal note, not research-based anything, is that, yes, we need the systems in place, but we have to be cautious about the people who are going to be making these decisions, because they're going to want to put a system in place that keeps them as the power, the kingmakers. And so how do we do this?
How do we do it?
Right?
All right.
Without giving them a voice. In a sense, we're going to have to take away their voice to do it.
Right. Well, let me say, let me take you back in history and remind you of that time. It's the same conversation that was had during the institution of slavery. The debate I remember reading the works of people like Adam Smith and others who argued at the time that there is no way the institution of slavery would change because the people sitting in the British Parliament were slave owners. How could they make decisions that's going against their interests? How did the institution of slavery change?
Rebellion.
All right. The people fought for it.
They
had to fight for it. The Queen didn't give us freedom. The Parliament didn't give us freedom. Abolitionists didn't give us freedom.
Make it economically unviable.
We made, absolutely, and the difference between then and now is that when our ancestors were fighting, they knew they would be killed.
Yes.
When they stood up to the system, they knew they would be hanged.
Yes.
They knew they would be set as an example, but they did it.
Yeah. They fought for the country.
They believed in the inhumanity of what they were suffering. They knew it was wrong, and they stood up and fought.
Yeah.
I urge all of us to look at the system we have today. We know it is not fair.
Yeah.
We know it is in the interest of a few. And in the same way, we, the majority of us, many of us, should say enough is enough. We are going to demand, we're going to fight for, we're going to stand for a different system that will give the majority of us a fighting chance to survive and thrive. That's today's conversation. So I don't expect that the decisions is going to be pure, which is, you see why I have to start with base point, stage one. Step one has to be that we understand we have to make the decisions. We have to step up. We can't wait for anyone else to do it. Yeah. We have to do it. And it is when we do that, it's when enough of us do that, that Jamaica will change.
Yeah. Dr. Hamilton, Professor Hamilton, we we are going to close it down here for this evening. But I'm telling you, you stood up like Nanny of the Maroon, like Sam Sharp, like
I don't
Paul
think I can
Bogle.
compare. No
Like Paul
way.
Bogle. You know, talk about mobilizing change. Talk about that. You know, it runs in your blood.
All I can say is that yes, it runs in my blood. I'm an ancestor I am certainly one of the children of the ancestors who believe in standing up.
Yes.
And I want to just say to people, nothing we're doing compares to the heroism of our ancestors who stood up in the face of the inhumanity.
Of certain death. Of certain
Absolutely.
death. But Professor, I know you're wrapping up, but I just want to just throw this in. And it comes back to the point you made, that statement that you heard today from the government that did not give you enough solace that this is going to be any success. One of the things that I find a lot as I listen is that and I am not in Jamaica for a number of years. I visit, I do all this stuff, so I'm not going to speak as if I know. But I do believe that the civic responsibilities that we have to learn to exploit those without relying on what the government wants to do, in a sense that, and I know through your being the Institute of Policy and Legal Policy and Development, those kind of institutions are in some ways seen as independent in that sense. Yeah. But we really need to find a way of mobilizing this kind of civic action, this kind of civic activism that is apolitical. And that is the challenge, because if we can get this constitutional conversation to be situated outside of a political discourse, and really about people and how people can be involved, but it's built up enough that it causes the governments of the day to recognize this group as I think that is where we can get that action done and get the change we want by devoiding them of that voice in it. Because I think once they're involved, it will never change, because the money is flowing, the business people are involved. And I think even relying on them to do this properly is why they will never do it properly. That's why there's no terms of reference. That's why there's no timeline, because they cannot ever commit to their own demise. They cannot.
You know, let me say that we, as part of the Advocates Network, have come together along non-partisan lines. Let me just say that there are individuals, I'm sure we all have and ought to have political leanings.
Allegiances,
in this work of coming to grips with where we are now in the country, we're clear that we are talking about what is in the national interest. This is not a party political conversation. And we have to lead it and engage it that way. We have to trust that people who know us and know where we're coming from will believe it, because it is so easy to say, you see them, no bother with them. Them is PMP, them is this, them is that.
Yeah, exactly.
And discredit what we're trying to do. And I want to urge Jamaicans, don't listen to this, because divide and rule is the oldest strategy used to undermine our capacity to come together. And therefore, listen to what we say, listen to the messages that we're carrying, join us in the conversation, because it's not our conversation, it's a conversation with all of us. So we are taking your voice, we're encouraging us to talk together and to engage not just a set of conversation, but a set of actions that ultimately can take us to another level.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I don't have a word to say after that. Well said. And the action part, Professor Hamilton, the action, I hope that somebody will start or even continue the conversation into action the day after tomorrow, the week after next, and so on and so forth, to get this done as soon as possible, so that Jamaica will be in a better place.
Absolutely. And the first actions is about this kind of conversation about our role in shaping Jamaica. Once we get that under our belt, and we all are agreed that we have to act, and it's what we want that matters for the future of the country, and we're prepared to do it, that will have change. Until then, not much will change.
Yeah, it's going to be horrible. Yeah, still. Professor Hamilton, tell us how people can get involved in the advocacy.
All right, so actually we have a website that should be online now. Of course, I can share that with you. But
Yes.
advocatesnetja is our email address. The easiest way to communicate with us. Just send us an email and we'll respond. And look out for us on Facebook. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. And you know, it's not hard to find us. We're out there, we're talking, we're actively, and importantly, we're working with organizations, certainly with respect to this public education and engagement. We're working with the Jamaica Accountability Beta Portal, JAM. We're working with the National Integrity Action, NIA, and we're working with the Institute of Law and Economics and other organizations who agree that this is important, this is priority, so you can contact us. And all three organizations have websites and you can communicate with us through the website.
Yeah, give us the email again, advocates.
It's advocatesnet Jamaica. JA, sorry, JA. Advocatesnet JA, yes. At gmail.com.
At gmail.com, okay. All right, that's advocatesnet JA.
Yes, I'm gonna just make sure I give you the right one.
Yeah.
Yes,
and you know, I'm following you on Twitter. I'm following you on Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know you were on Instagram as well. So that's good. I love the stories. Yeah, because they're very action oriented that are coming out of the network.
My bad, it's advocatesnet at Gmail, not JA. Advocatesnet at gmail.com, right?
All right, okay. So we're gonna post it on the YouTube channel too.
All right, wonderful.
Right. Professor Hamilton, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah, you can correct it anytime.
Sorry?
Correct it if it's not.
Yes, it's advocatesnet at gmail.com,
All right, good. So advocacy. All right, we're gonna post it on the YouTube. Thank you so much for coming on. And we're gonna get you back on to talk more about even as it relates to legal matters, which we want to link it to, you know, regular schooling, that there's some basic legal educational principles that the common people need to know before they leave high school. And we're looking at how can we get people to understand even the Constitution just a little bit. Because in America here, they have some little phrase that you remember, just like how we have sadly, a lot of mass shooting now. People still cling to the right to bear arms. So if you ask, what's in the constitutional law? Everybody like the right to bear arms, Second Amendment. So they know that. We want the people to know.
The thing is, they don't know the third one, though. They don't know the third amendment. Or the fifth. Or they maybe know the fifth, but they don't know the third.
Yes.
But you know, it's again, you know, if you don't, you remember your constitution starts with we the people, right?
Yes,
we the people, in order to, right? Now, for me, if again, I come back to base, right? If we start with the base that we want to shape a Jamaica that's in our interest, and we want to create a constitution in our interest, then we must start with that important change in our constitution, a provision that says this constitution is written by the people, for the people, in the interest of the people.
Yes. All right, so we're gonna come and just discuss some aspects of it so that people will get an idea of what we're dealing with in their everyday life, because it's affecting them.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you, viewers. Thank you so much for being on. We appreciate you. Please spread the word because these are actionable steps that we're taking. They are not theory at all. You can go there and live them, live these actionable steps in your lives and try to make a change in our quote unquote democracy. We really need to make a change in our lives locally and nationally. Thank you so much. Dr. Hamilton, we'll touch base as soon as possible so that we can continue the discourse.
Thank you so much for having me. Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you. Dr. Barker, you know, we'll chat soon. Enjoy your day. We're gonna go to sleep now. You enjoy your day.
All right, all the best.
Thanks for coming in, Professor. Great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye. See you soon.